What's up, my wizards? Dev, along with Big Beak here from SBMTG, to give you something cool, or at least I hope you think it's cool. Over this past weekend, we had Pro Tour Shadows over Innistrad, and some of the best players, not only in the world right now, but literally the best players of all time, came together to show us sort of their different solutions to the format, and all of these decks are really, really cool, you guys. Just letting you know off the rip, every single deck in the top 8 is different. It's not often that we see that in standard Magic nowadays. And just with so many Bant Company decks, you know, floating around, only one made the top 8. That's amazing. A bunch of other weird stuff made the top 8, and a lot of it looks really good. So I'm going to take you through the top 8, deck by deck. Before I do move on, though, into the top 8, I do want to say that all of the deck lists, lands, sideboards, main deck, everything is going to be down there in the description, so check those out if you're really interested in any of these. If you enjoy the content, hit the like button. It helps. Let's go ahead and jump in at number 8 here. The 8th place deck, and I'll go to the graphic for this, was, get this, you guys, Red-White Eldrazi Goggles. That is a hell of a name right there. Piloted by Luis Salvato, the 2015 Sunday Super Series champion. You'll note, by the way, before I move on, that pretty much everyone except for one player had a title going into the top 8. So a lot of really, really good players in this top 8. But this deck looks really, really neat. The way that Goggles decks work in this format, and Goggles did have a huge price spike over the weekend. I think it went from something like $250 to as much as little as $10 now, I want to say. So big price spike for Goggles over the weekend because it was really, really important. 2 different Goggles decks in the top 8 here, but they're both very different Goggles decks, but they keep this same core of red spells. You'll notice that. Some interesting things to know with these Goggles decks, and we've talked about things like this before, but it's really important in this format now. Tormenting Voice and Magmatic Insight. You can copy either one of those with a Pyromancer's Goggles and only have to discard 1 card. You did that as an additional cost to play either of those cards, and you can play them for free and not pay any cost if you use Pyromancer's Goggles to copy it. So you don't have to pay the extra cost of discarding cards, in this case, for either of these spells. So with something like Tormenting Voice, you pay 2 mana, you copy it with the Goggles, and you discard a card, but you draw 4 cards. It's insane. Card advantage, same thing goes with Magmatic Insight. Same thing with Lightning Axe. If you copy a Lightning Axe, you'll deal 5 damage to 2 different creatures, but you'll only have to discard the 1 card. So Goggles is just insane with so many good cards in the format of red cards. And you'll also note an important thing here with the Goggles is that we play a lot of 1 mana red spells. That's for a couple of reasons in these 2 Goggles decks. That is so we can play the Goggles, tap it on the turn we play it, and get value out of it by copying a spell. Super important. And also you'll note the deck plays Fall of the Titans, and not a lot of players are clear on this, but it is true. You can copy a Fall of the Titans, and when the copy will have the same value that you paid for X. You know, X won't be 0 on the copy. A lot of people think that, but if you pay, you know, if you have a 4 damage Fall of the Titans, and you copy it with the Pyromancer's Goggles, then it will deal, the X will equal 4 on the copy too. So this can, you know, Fall of the Titans is a win con for either Goggles deck here in this tournament, because basically you can just deal 20 damage with the Fall of the Titans after copying, and, you know, Surge, by the way, very easy to get off with all of these 1 mana red spells. That's why, that's another reason we play so many of them, is because we can activate the Surge very easily on Fall of the Titans. The top end is Chandra. You got Dark Dwellers in there to sort of, you know, recast all these premium red spells. That can be really good. And we're using Thought-Knot Seer and Eldrazi Displacer. You know, as the usual combo, but the Eldrazi Displacer also works well with Goblin Dark Dwellers. So there's that. And the Matter Reshaper in the deck. So Eldrazi Displacer only had a 2 of, but if you have one out, it can create value with any other creature in the deck. Altogether, the deck is really strong and plays a lot of great pieces. It's well positioned against a lot of aggro and even mid-range decks in the format. And it's got a lot of long game value with Displacer, you know, flickering creatures over and over. But I did note that it was very weak to Planeswalkers. It had a terrible time against Esper Control, like a lot of decks did. Seth Manfield's Esper Control just completely tore it apart. But that's, you know, he just had a million Planeswalkers with super high loyalty on the board all at the same time, and there really wasn't much that Salvato could do against Planeswalkers. So looks like that might be an issue for the deck. There's 26 lands in this deck, and I won't be going too far over the mana bases unless it really warrants it for these decks. Like the Esper Control decks, the mana base is important for that deck, because that's really what separated the 2 Esper decks in the finals from other Esper decks in the field. But we'll get to that. in just a moment. With this deck, important lands to note are Drownyard Temple. You can discard them to Magmatic Insights or Tormenting Voice and get them back later. Small amount of value, but very, very important. And then Westvale Abbey is here, not only because we're playing Eldrazi creatures and it produces colorless mana, but if you get it to go off, it's pretty crazy, right? So you might as well play Westvale Abbey if you're playing Eldrazi, I think his thought process there. The number 7 deck in the tournament was piloted by Luis Scott Vargas, a fan favorite. Everybody loves LSV. And it was, get ready for this, you guys, Black-Green Aristocrats featuring Cryptolith Right. A lot of people just called this Cryptolith Right over the weekend. Luis and everybody else at Wizards in the booth doing the commentating insist on calling this Aristocrats. And it is obviously an Aristocrats build. You know, we see a lot of the same stuff that we saw in rally builds last season. You know, we see Zulaport Cutthroat, there's Nantuko Husk in there. Those two are obviously the engine of the deck, but this deck is also going to play a ton of creatures early game. And this is probably the deck that fills out its board the quickest in the whole format. I mean, and Cryptolith Right, by the way, I have to say this, piloted by nearly the entire Channel Fireball team, so that is street cred. When Luis Scott Vargas carries you at 7-0 into the finals, or the top 8, then you know that you're probably a decent card. The deck just plays like grease lightning. I mean, it can often have, you know, as many as 4 or 5 creatures out by like turn 3. The deck, if you can untap on turn 3 with a Cryptolith Right and like a couple of 1-mana guys, then that's crazy. And yes, you can do that pretty easily because you'll play like a Loam Dryad turn 1, then you'll play turn 2 Cryptolith Right. You'll tap the Loam Dryad to play another 1-mana guy. Turn 3, if you untap with that board state, you can do ridiculous crap really, really fast. So, and the deck just basically wins off of Zulaport Cutthroat damage a lot of the times. Impacts Collected Company, which is extremely important for it. It can get a lot of scries off of Catacomb Sifter. I mean, the deck does all the same stuff that it did last season. It's just really helped out by Cryptolith Right here in the mana department. The deck was always kind of starved on mana and wanted to do a lot of things with its mana. And this deck sort of, with Cryptolith Right, it lets you do everything with your mana that you always wanted and not have to sort of choose between different things. You know, oh, I can just do it all in one turn. And the deck has a really good matchup against Bant Company, which is, that makes sense, you know, 87 decks going into the tournament were Bant Company. It's an extremely popular, very OP deck in the format right now, it looks like, and a lot of decks looking to beat it. This deck does that fairly well. Decent matchup against it. Westvale Abbey is probably the card that I saw do most of the work for the deck in featured matchups. Abbey can flip very, very quickly in this deck. I mean, we get 5 creatures like it's nothing. And we can also obviously tap those creatures for mana. So getting to the 5-mana activation cost on Abbey is a breeze. And if you have a Zulaport Cutthroat out, I should note that you'll sack those 5 guys, and that does, you know, 5 life drain. And then you'll swing with Ormondal, and that does 9 life drain. So 14 damage and 14 life gained all in one turn is an enormous turn. And you can do it out of nowhere. You know, you can drop Westvale Abbey on a turn and then play a couple of guys, tap them for mana, you know, and just end up, it's very, very easy. All in one turn, and relatively early in the game too, like turn 4 or 5. Get an Ormondal on a perfect draw, which doesn't happen all the time, but it can. The deck plays 23 lands, and it really doesn't need to play a bunch of lands. Obviously, this is the deck that played the least lands in the top 8, because our creatures are also mana, so that's really, really good. And again, as far as the lands go, Westvale Abbey is just a super freaking all-star. It can close out games, you know, completely out of nowhere. Coming in at number 6, another Goggles deck. Brad Nelson, player that a lot of people have also heard of, the former player of the year, just like Luis Scott Vargas is a former player of the year. He piloted Goggles ramp all the way to 6th place. This deck was also really good, just like Luis came in 7-0, and that does, by the way, I should mention, include some draft rounds. Not all standard, but the deck was flawless coming into the top 8. Same thing with Goggles ramp, completely undefeated going into the top 8 here. And Brad Nelson's obviously a great player, and he does a lot of the same things that Salvado does in his deck, except he's going with a ramp strategy with things like Nissa's Pilgrimage, and he's also using Worldbreaker, which is a crazy card for a couple of reasons. Worldbreaker, the most notable thing it breaks is lands, although it can break Pyromancer's Goggles, that's important, and it can also break enchantments. Stasis Snare can be especially important to break, but mostly it's going to break Westvale Abbeys for you, and it can punish any decks that are trying to play 3 weird colors in this format by attacking the color that it needs the most, or maybe has the least of in the deck. Worldbreaker, just very, very good performance over the weekend. It stays strong in this format. It's nice to see a sort of ramp deck in the top 8, although this deck does a lot more things on the bottom end than the normal ramp deck has been doing. We're seeing a lot of the same tricks with Goggles, a la Tormenting Voice, Magmatic Insight. You still got Fall of the Titans in there, you know, which can, just like the other deck, do 20 damage out of nowhere, you know. But really, the big differentiator here is the inclusion of Ramp, obviously, and Worldbreaker and Dragonlord Atarka. Dragonlord Atarka may actually need to be bumped up a copy in this deck. It's so good against all the Planeswalkers in the format that we did see a ton of over the weekend. Before I move on to the sideboard, and this is like the only deck that I'll do this with, I just want to make a suggestion. Am I crazy, or does Structural Distortion actually look pretty good with this? It can exile Abbeys forever, it can exile Hangerbacks too, or other Goggles. It can exile Drown Yards, and when you copy it, it can do two different things if you wanted to, and deal 4 damage. That seems pretty good. Brad plays 24 lands in the deck. That's because of all the ramp in the actual deck. You know, Hedron Archive, Nissan's Pilgrimage, Goggles, ramps too, you know. So we don't need that much ramp. And only 4 sources of colorless mana in the land base. Remember, we are playing Hedron Archive. But only 4 colorless sources in the mana base to sort of get Worldbreaker out of your graveyard if you need to. That's okay. We're drawing a ton of cards in the deck. So we're pretty, you know, very able to hit a Drown Yard Temple if we play a playset. Is it time? It's time. Okay, my favorite deck of the weekend by a lot, and I finally get to talk about it. This is Seasons Past, piloted by John effing Finkel. If you don't know, now you know. He's in the Hall of Fame. He's a former world champion and maybe the greatest player of all time. He was in the very first Pro Tour. He's in this Pro Tour, which is actually the 100th Pro Tour in Magic's history, if that tells you anything about Mr. Finkel, the Fink, the Machine, Johnny Magic. This is his 16th Pro Tour top 8, so he knows Magic, and he has put together something pretty ridiculous, and it's awesome. If you can't tell what the heck this is you're looking at, let me explain to you some of the more important things about the deck. Well, first of all, the interaction between Seasons Past and Dark Petition, which is a 4 of, you're not seeing things, is crazy. What you'll do is you'll play Dark Petition, let's say. You'll play Dark Petition to search up your Seasons Past. You'll put the Seasons Past into your hand. Dark Petition's in your graveyard. You'll play the Seasons Past. That'll return really a lot of different stuff, and also Dark Petition to your hand. Seasons Past will go to the bottom of your library. You can then play Dark Petition again to search up Seasons Past and put it back in your hand. And you just repeat this loop over and over and get back all of your removal and all of your hand disruption, and you just never run out of stuff to blow their things away, and that's crazy. Seems pretty awesome, right? Just a control deck that never runs out of removal. That's a pretty novel idea. Problem, though, if there is a problem, is that it lacks a really, really good win condition, although Calidus is a really good win condition in this format, let me say that, but only playing 2 of them can be a problem when you really need to draw into him. But Calidus is fantastic. You know, he's really good, again, against the black-green Sacrifice and Aristocrats decks. Pretty good. You know, you can just blank the board against white weenie decks sort of in the mid-game. So just a great guy, and gets really, really big as the game goes on. If they kill him, that's fine. We get him back. Seasons Past is crazy. So, and there is consideration, if you'll notice, to play a lot of different things at different mana costs. You know, Dead Weight is our one of, 1 mana guy, or 1 mana cost removal, all the way up to Seasons Past, which costs 6. We're playing 5 at Dark Petition. 4 is Kaladas, and Languish, which we're playing the full 4 of here. Languish, an incredible card over the weekend, and saw a lot of play. But this deck interests me an awful lot. It looks dirtily, it looks super controlly, it looks very grindy, and the kind of thing that just has this inevitability where when you do draw your Kalidas, you're gonna win the game. As far as John's land base, it's pretty cut and dry here. We're just playing the 2 colors, so we can really streamline things and play as many of each color as we possibly can. There is a cool trick with Evolving Wilds I need to point out before I move on, and that's that if it's in your graveyard when you play a Seasons Past, it counts as a 0 mana cost card. You can put it back in your hand when you play Seasons Past. Seasons Past will go to the bottom of your library, then you can play the Evolving Wilds and pop it to shuffle the Seasons Past back into your deck. That is also awesome. The 4th place deck is a deck that's been around for a while, and it just will not die. This is Esper Dragons, piloted by Shota Yasuoka, another legend. He's a Hall of Famer as well. A few Hall of Famers, Luis Scott Vargas, John Finkel, Yasuoka, all Hall of Famers. So lots of, like I said, amazing players in the top 8 here. Esper Dragons was fairly well represented, but did not do so well in the tournament as a whole. But this deck did fairly well, especially with its pilot. You know, Shota is just, he's a legend. So that's all there is to that. Ojutai is quite impressive in this deck and in this format, really. It just completely takes the control of the game as soon as it resolves. And without Crackling Doom around, it can just really do its thing. You know, it's crazy. And I gotta say, too, Silumgar putting in a lot of work on camera from what I saw. Silumgar stealing a creature is just fan-freaking-tastic, you guys. And sure, there's removal for Silumgar, but he's good against a lot of the removal in the format too. Ultimate Prize, Languish, Grasp of Darkness, so he's harder to remove than he looks like. One of the big differences, or at least it looks like, between the two Esper decks, and we'll get to the other one coming up here soon, but I want to go ahead and point this out, is that this deck plays more main deck counter magic. The other deck plays more main deck removal. The Esper Control I'm about to show you only plays 2 main deck counters. This plays 6 and doesn't play 4 Language, which was probably a big mistake. But of course, you've got Dragonlord Ojutai to worry about. You don't want to wipe your own Ojutai. So this deck probably, I would say, not quite as good probably as the Planeswalker Control, the Esper Super Friends deck that we saw Mansfield play. But, same time, this deck still plays all the good cards, and Ojutai is just a force in this format. It's very, very impressive. We're in the top 3 now. Number 3, and a lot of people are probably excited about this, actually, Esper Control. A deck that people really didn't give too much of a shake. This one was piloted by Seth Manfield, the reigning Magic World Champion. That's a heck of a title right there, and probably means that you're fairly important. Instead of playing Dragons and Silumgar Scorn and like Foul-Tongue Invocation, this deck uses Planeswalkers, and note that Narset is here. Narset made it to the top 8, you guys, and that's what people are probably most excited about. I noted in the chat that a lot of people really loved that, including MTG Lion, who showed up in the chat. We both were really happy that Narset was around, and Narset putting in a lot of work, again, on camera, from what I was able to see. Again, this deck only plays, though, 2 main deck counterspells, and they're Spell Shrivel. I'll talk about the mana here in a second, but a lot of people were trying to figure out how to solve the mana for an Esper deck, you know. Just, it turns out that Shards, it looks like Bant, for instance, good mana bases right now. Wedges, like the Khans wedges, you know, Mardu, etc., not great mana right now. So how do you solve the mana problem? This is a way right here, you know. A lot of people were playing Void Shatter as their, 2-of main deck counterspell, but this only costs the 1 blue mana and might as well be Void Shatter most of the time. By the way, I do want to point out, too, this deck plays Sphinx of the Final Word, and it main deck Silumgar's Command. This is a mad deck, but it made it into the top 3 over the weekend, and Mansfield piloted it very well. Mansfield, just an incredible Magic player, obviously, reigning world champion. But just to see a deck with some of this stuff put up such an amazing performance is just absolutely great. You know, Sphinx, the only creature in the entire deck. Note and rejoice that the main deck doesn't play Jace Vryn's Prodigy. It does get cited in an awful lot. He's 3 of in the sideboard. And main deck Silumgar's Command, I was just talking about this on the channel the other week. Really, really good against Planeswalkers and can often take out a creature at the same time. Here's the mana base, and I just want to show it to you because I think it's very, very important. You know, a lot of Esper decks faltered over the weekend, and they all had way different mana bases from one another. This mana base is just one of the most flexible things about the deck, and I think for that reason, getting it right, very important. So absorb this here mana base, because it's probably important to get Esper to work. Second place at this tournament was Bant Company, followed by a boo. For some reason, a lot of people just really don't like Bant Company. I guess they're sick of it for whatever reason. It's the most played deck right now, and that's, people hate net decking for whatever reason. But I'd be out of a job if it weren't for net decking. This one piloted by Andrea Mingucci, and it was funny, over the chat, people were like, there's a lady? Like, no, that's a dude from Italy. But, it wouldn't be crazy to see a lady in the top 8. Melissa DeTora, for instance, has top 8'd a Pro Tour before. So, but in any case, this deck right here just looks like most of the Bant Company decks that we've seen in this format right here. Didn't really switch up a whole lot, But I do want to talk about Company here. Company was represented not only in Bant, obviously, but also in Luis Scott Vargas's and really Team CFB's all of their decks, the green-black Aristocrats. There's also a few Bant Company decks over the weekend, and Jund Company, also fairly well represented over the weekend. So Company price spike, but is definitely well positioned here for the next 6 months to be maybe, possibly, the most important card in the format. Here's the mana base right here, same thing really. I mean, not much different, although this deck does play a lot of Evolving Wilds, a full playset. And Evolving Wilds is finally an important card in Standard. That's pretty nice to see, but this deck again, just the same mana base we've been seeing for about a month now. In first place over the weekend at Pro Tour Shadows over Innistrad went to, ready for this? Green-White Tokens, piloted by Steve Rubin. The only player in the entire top 8 to not have some sort of title to his name going into the top 8, which is ironic because he came out of the top 8, the winner of the whole thing, you know? He's Pro Tour champion right now. So that's just a really, really good event. For him. So good job, good on you, Steve Rubin. But we've been sort of talking about this deck for months now, ever since Nissa was first spoiled. Obviously, curving from Nissa into Gideon is insane. But so what's different now? What makes the deck incredible? Westvale Abbey is the short answer to that question. In a meta that, you know, you can play Secure the Waste. Both Nissa and Gideon produce tokens. Hangerback Walkers in the deck, it's obviously good at producing tokens. So something like Westvale Abbey is just a KO punch in the mid game, and sometimes you don't even need it. We just produce so many tokens and have a couple of different Anthem effects that in a format that's a little longer like this one is, something like Green-White Tokens is just incredibly good at overwhelming. And it looks like it would be pretty bad against Languish, which was overly played, and Chandra for that matter. But with 2 Planeswalkers on the board that aren't affected in any way by Languish, you can just recover like that. Snap. Super easy to recover from Languish, and it takes no time. And speaking of Hangerback, by the way, and Languish, Hangerback is very good in a format dominated by Languish, because if they want to play 4 of Languish in the main deck, Hangerback Walker is pretty good punishment for that. I do want to note, too, the 1-of Evolutionary Leap. I think this is a pro choice right here. He can just sack a plant token from Nissa and get an Avacyn or a Hangerback Walker. And note the 4-of Avacyn, by the way. I think that's very important. I was just talking the other day about how I think a 4-of Avacyn makes a lot of sense in this format because, you know, you can play a non-flipped Avacyn on the same board as a transformed Avacyn, and that's totally fine. And there's this really neat trick that I didn't see on camera, but I'm sure he had to have done at some point over the weekend with 4 Avacyn in the deck, where if one Avacyn is set to flip, an Archangel Avacyn, then when it does flip into the Purifier, then you can put that trigger on the stack and go ahead and play another Archangel Avacyn, and then put that Archangel's trigger ahead of the Purifier's trigger. That way, all of your creatures will first be indestructible, and then the Purifier will do 3 damage to everything. Which is just crazy, you know, they lose most of their guys, you keep all your guys. That's awesome. 25 lands in the deck, and it's really not rocket science, you know, 4 Canopy Vista, 4 Fortified Village, some basic lands, and some Westvale Abbey. Pretty uncomplicated mana base, and the 3 Westvale Abbey, necessary. As far as the format goes, I'll leave you with an analogy. This is how it makes me feel. I play a lot of Smash Brothers. I don't know if you do. I hope you do. Good game. But for people that are familiar with it, I think you'll understand this analogy. Cons, Standard. A year or so ago, that felt kind of like Melee. You know, very fast paced. We had 2 Pro Tours in a row that were won by mono red aggros. Very, very fast format. And there were a few, you know, very powerful decks in the format. We got to play with things like Siege Rhino all the time, you know, just very important, powerful cards that felt almost like cheating. Monastery Swiftspear, you know. So that reminds me of Melee. Just unbalanced, you know, 2 or 3 decks were just fantastic. As far as BFZ and Oath of the Gatewatch Standard, the last Standard season that we just rotated out of, still obviously have BFZ, don't get me wrong, but that's how naming conventions work. Anyway, BFZ OGW Standard that we just rotated out of. That kind of reminded me of Brawl, you know, not much excitement going on, kind of a slow format from what it looked like, you know, nobody really knew what to do with it. There was really one super duper powerful deck, Green Red Ramp, that a lot of people played for a long time. So, you know, that was, you know, the meta knight of the format was Green Red Ramp. But this format, Shadows over Innistrad Standard, sort of makes me think of Smash 4. You know, it's not Melee, it's not Brawl, it's balance. We see here in the first top 8 of the Pro Tour, or in the, you know, the top 8 of the Pro Tour, first huge tournament of the season, that there's, you know, 8 different decks. Some of them are using the same ideas, but 8 different decks here, which means the format looks very balanced to me. Overall, balance is a very good thing, and like I said, the format's not solved. There's still a lot of things that can be done in the format, and a lot of decks that just barely didn't make, you know, top 8 status or top 16 even. Like I said, that Mardu Control deck that I was watching looked really, really good to me. And there's still a bunch of powerful decks that didn't quite make the cut, you know? So there's a lot of things that we can do in this format right now. I just think this format has a lot of growth to go through, and even some different things that people sort of have to find. That is officially all I have for now. I apologize for what is undoubtedly an extremely long video. But I hope you guys enjoyed the content. If you did, hit the like button, share the video, because everyone needs to see things like this, right? Comment, let me know how you felt about the breakdown, and then subscribe if you're new. And I'll see you guys later. Next time we're doing Black-White Eldrazi. Can't wait to finally show that deck to you. And then we're going to go off the deep end into some crazy budget stuff like Devil Impact Tremors. And then we'll get back on track with Red-White mid-range. That's a lot of decks coming up, and I'm working on even more. So stick with us, and I'll see you guys next time. I'm Dev from SBMTG. Thanks for watching, my wizards.